My name is Mariana and I'm 40 years old. I work as a medical assistant and have been married for 12 years. My husband John and I have two wonderful children, a son who's in 3rd grade and a daughter who's in 1st grade. John and I met when he frequently visited the hospital where I work to handle sales. I was the one who always assisted him. At first, we only exchanged small talk, but when we discovered we had mutual friends, our connection deepened. After sharing several dinners, we started dating, and 3 years later, we got married. John is incredibly bright, well-spoken, and a natural communicator. He often says that working in sales was his true calling. To be honest, John wasn't my type physically at first, but as we got to know each other, I found myself falling in love with him. It's been 15 years since we first met, and even now, after the kids are in bed, we can talk for hours, losing track of time. Our children Patrick and Katie have grown up wonderfully, and like their father, they are both talkative and full of life, making our home lively every day. I think we're a pretty typical family. John is also very hands-on with household chores. Sometimes he'll announce what he's cooking for dinner, like tonight's steak, and when he does, Patrick and Katie eagerly head off to school, excited for the day. John wasn't always a great cook. In fact, when we first met, he couldn't cook at all. But over time, his cooking skills have improved, and I'm amazed at how much he's learned. The reason John handles dinner is because I'm often not home in the evenings. My mother has been in the hospital for a long time due to a chronic illness, and I visit her every day after work. Initially, I would rush home to prepare dinner, but one day John offered to take over. He told me, "I'll cook dinner and take care of the kids. You focus on spending time with your mother." His kindness brought me to tears. From that day on, I made sure to prepare breakfast and do as many household chores as I could before work. John took care of dinner, looked after the kids, and helped them with their homework in the evenings. My mother has been in and out of the hospital for the past 3 years, and lately her condition has worsened. I'm not sure what the future holds, so visiting her every day helps me cope with my anxiety. I lost my father in an accident when I was very young, and as an only child, it was just my mother and me until I got married. My mother was a smart woman, working in the same medical office as I do now. She also invested in stocks with the inheritance from my father, which brought in extra income. Thanks to her, I was able to attend private schools and live without any financial worries. When my mother was temporarily discharged from the hospital, I repeatedly told my mother that I wanted her to live with us, but she always shook her head, perhaps out of concern for our family. "It's okay, Mariana. You worry too much. I'm better than you think," she would say each time I asked her to stay with us. Fortunately, my mother was able to manage her daily activities on her own and didn't require any nursing care. However, I was still anxious, so I made it a point to visit her every day, even after she was discharged from the hospital. Since I have to work, I could only visit her in the evenings on weekdays. During the day, my Aunt Michelle would visit her. Aunt Michelle is single and has been running a small restaurant since before I was born. As a little girl, I often went to eat dinner with my mother at Aunt Michelle's restaurant. When my mother was away at work, Aunt Michelle would take care of me and keep me company. During my rebellious phase, whenever I fought with my mother, I would run away to Aunt Michelle's place to cool down. I vividly remember how, over the food she cooked, our conversations would make me forget what I was angry about. In many ways, I feel like I was raised by both my mother and Aunt Michelle. Her cooking is amazing, and some of her regular customers have been coming to her restaurant since I was a little girl. Even after I got married, my family often visited Aunt Michelle's restaurant for meals. Then one day, I visited my mother at the hospital until just before visiting hours ended, and by the time I returned home, it was quite late. To my surprise, my mother-in-law was still at our place and the children were still awake, all 4 of them relaxing in the living room. "Oh, Mariana, welcome back. Were you visiting your mother at the hospital again today? You must be exhausted after such a long day," she greeted me. My parents-in-law live about a 5-minute drive from us. My mother-in-law, Rachel, doesn't bully or pick on me, but she can be quite stubborn, which makes it difficult for us to get along. Once she decides on something, she insists on having it her way and won't budge. When Rachel visits our home like this, it's usually because she wants money. My father-in-law, Craig, still has a job and works very hard, but we're not wealthy by any means. For the past few years, Rachel has asked us to send her $500 every month as living expenses. However, lately she has been coming over more often, asking for additional money whenever she claims to be in need. Today Rachel said she came to see her grandchildren, but I suspected she probably wanted money. After we made sure the kids were in bed asleep, Rachel turned to me and said, "I'm sorry, but I'm short on money again this month. Could you give me a little more?" John, frustrated, replied, "We've been giving you money for living expenses every month. My father is still working, so what are you spending all that money on?" "Don't be so angry," Rachel responded. "I'm getting old and I have medical bills to pay. Are you telling me not to go to the hospital? Besides, your father's salary has been reduced because of the recession." Every time she asks for money, John tries to reason with her, but Rachel never backs down. I've witnessed this exchange many times, but no matter what, my mother-in-law always finds an excuse and refuses to leave until we give her the money. I calmed my angry husband down and handed Rachel the $200 I had just found in my wallet. After giving her the money, John left to take a bath, so I walked Rachel to the door. "Thank you, Mariana, you're always so supportive," she said with a smile. Then, in an unusual turn, she asked, "By the way, how is your mother doing?" It was the first time Rachel had ever inquired about my mother, which caught me off guard. She had hardly ever visited her, so I wondered why she was asking now. Nevertheless, I replied, "Well, she's still the same. The doctors have told me this hospital stay is going to be a long one." Rachel nodded and then, to my surprise, bluntly asked, "Oh, I see. What will happen to your inheritance?" I was taken aback by her sudden question, so I responded, "What inheritance?" "What do you mean?" Rachel continued, "I was just wondering if you've already had those conversations with your mother. I believe she has a sister, right? You should talk to your mother about this matter now, before it's too late. After all, you wouldn't want to have any trouble with your aunt about the inheritance when the time comes, would you?" Her words made me angry and irritated, so I replied firmly, "Don't worry. My aunt and I don't have that kind of relationship. There won't be any trouble." A few weeks later, John, who had taken the children to his parents' house for the holiday, came home in a panic. "Mariana, my mother bought a mansion near your workplace." "A mansion near my work? But that place is still under construction," I said, confused. Since we lived in the countryside, the mansion was quite conspicuous. Whenever we passed by the construction site, John and I would often wonder who would live in such a grand place. "What? Where did she get that kind of money?" I asked, completely baffled. Asked him in surprise. Where would she get that kind of money? John shook his head, clearly puzzled. "I have no idea. I questioned her a lot, but she wouldn't give me a straight answer. Maybe she's relying on my father's retirement money," he speculated. A thought crossed my mind. If Rachel can afford a mansion, does that mean we don't need to give her money for living expenses anymore? Exactly, John agreed, his frustration growing. It doesn't make any sense. If she has enough money to buy a mansion, she should have more than enough of her living expenses. We were both angry and irritated, realizing we had been giving Rachel money, believing she was in need. If she could afford a mansion, her claims of financial hardship were clearly false. John and I decided then and there that we would stop giving her money, no matter what she said in the future. Supposedly, her mortgage and deposit on the mansion had been approved, and it would be completed in 6 months. Rachel had told John she was thrilled about living in a mansion during her old age. But just a month after this conversation, my mother passed away. I was in shock because she had seemed well and healthy when I visited her the day before. It was a bittersweet blessing that I received a call at work saying my mother was in critical condition. I was able to leave early and rush to the hospital, just in time to be with her in her final moments. She may have been waiting for you to come, Mariana, Aunt Michelle, who had arrived earlier, said softly as I broke down in tears. There was so much to handle with the wake and funeral that I barely had time to grieve. After seeing my mother off and returning home, the reality of her absence began to sink in. I lost all my strength and broke down in tears, but my children comforted me. After the funeral, I spent the rest of the day busy with cleaning up my mother's house. As Aunt Michelle and I sorted through her belongings, we came across so many memories, and I couldn't stop crying as they flooded back. John was incredibly supportive during this time, helping with the household chores and taking care of the children, despite being busy with work himself. I can't express how grateful I am for his support. My children were so sweet and attentive to my feelings. Patrick tried his best to cheer me up with funny stories from school, while Katie proudly showed me her A+ on a test, hoping to make me smile. I cried a lot after my mother's passing, but John, Patrick, Katie, and Aunt Michelle took such good care of me and gave me the strength to get through it. 3 days after the funeral, when I returned home from another day of cleaning up my mother's house, Rachel was there again. As soon as I walked through the door, she abruptly said, "When will you get the deposit?" "The payment is due soon." "Deposit? Payment? What are you talking about?" I asked, confused. "I'm talking about your inheritance. You got a lot of money, didn't you?" Rachel demanded. "Inheritance? I renounced my inheritance," I replied, surprised by her aggressive tone. "What? Are you kidding me?" Rachel's voice boomed, echoing throughout the house. After my mother passed away, I found out that her inheritance was nearly $2 million. My mother had told me she wanted me and Aunt Michelle to split it 50-50. However, my mother often spoke to me about her wishes for Aunt Michelle, saying, "If anything should happen to me, please take care of Michelle." I hoped Aunt Michelle would use my inheritance to renovate her restaurant. "Oh, Mother, don't say such ominous things," I often replied when she brought up the topic. Even the day before she passed away, my mother was still worried about Aunt Michelle's restaurant. "Are there still customers coming to Michelle's restaurant?" she asked. She mentioned the AC breaking down again, and I'm concerned. Aunt Michelle's restaurant, built before I was born, was indeed showing its age. My mother had offered many times to help with renovations, but Aunt Michelle always refused, saying she felt bad about spending my mother's money and didn't want to close the restaurant during repairs. While Aunt Michelle managed to keep the restaurant running, the building was deteriorating, and the cost of necessary repairs was becoming a burden. She once confided in me that although her loyal regulars still came, attracting new customers was difficult, likely due to the restaurant's outdated appearance. Having been a frequent customer myself for many years, I wanted Aunt Michelle to continue running the restaurant for as long as she could. Aunt Michelle, who had always prioritized work, spent money on the restaurant even if it meant cutting back on her own living expenses. She lived on the second floor of the restaurant, leading a very frugal life, which worried me whenever I visited her. Although the cost of ingredients had increased, she hardly raised the prices on her menu, always prioritizing her customers' satisfaction. Given that John and I both work and are financially stable, I felt no need for the inheritance. I wanted Aunt Michelle to have it all so she could finally renovate her beloved restaurant. Initially, Aunt Michelle refused, but when I told her that my mother had been worried about her even the day before she passed away, she finally agreed to accept it. When I discussed it with John, he supported my decision. We had been regulars at Aunt Michelle's restaurant since we started dating, often remarking on how delicious the food was and wishing she had more customers to enjoy it. When I told Rachel that I had renounced my inheritance, she snapped at me, her voice filled with anger. "What? Why would you do such a thing without consulting me? How am I supposed to pay for my mansion now? Your mansion? What are you talking about? John interjected. I thought you already finished paying it off. Rachel, clearly frustrated, retorted, the down payment is due in just a week. I've been waiting for your inheritance to come through. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The idea that Rachel had bought a mansion expecting to use my mother's inheritance to pay for it was infuriating. What did you just say? Don't you dare bring my mother into this, I shot back, my voice shaking with anger. Even if I had received the inheritance, why would I pay for your mansion? This was the first time I had ever spoken so strongly to my mother-in-law, and tears of anger welled up in my eyes. Of course you should pay for my mansion. I'm your mother. Rachel yelled. You were so eager to get your mother's inheritance that you neglected your own family just to visit her. Her words were like a slap in the face. How could you say such a horrible thing? I never wanted anything like that. My mother didn't want it either. Please, just leave. I had only ever been concerned about my mother's well-being. I never once discussed inheritance with her. All I wanted was for her to live as long as possible. Thought that Rachel could claim any right to my mother's legacy was beyond infuriating. Mom, that's just plain rude, John said, his tone firm. Mariana never had any such idea in her head. And what did you do for her mother? You barely even visited her. I'm really disappointed in you. Please go home. We won't be supporting your living expenses anymore. Rachel's face twisted in anger as she spat out, You two are terrible children. I'm leaving. She stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind her. After she left, John turned to me, his expression filled with regret. I'm so sorry about my mother. I had no idea what she was thinking. You don't have to worry about her, John said, apologizing as he spoke. Later, John explained that because of Rachel's age, she had agreed to a shorter mortgage term, which required a higher down payment. From that day on, Rachel called John daily, trying to get him to lend her money, but he stood firm and refused. As Rachel's demands became more persistent, John decided to talk to his father, Jeff, about the situation. When he did, both Jeff and Rachel came to our house to apologize. Jeff was completely in the dark about what had been happening. He knew they were planning to buy the mansion, but he thought they were going to use their savings. He also had no idea that John and I had been giving Rachel money for living expenses, or that she had been asking for even more. I was shocked to hear from Jeff that Rachel had told him she was coming to our house to help with household chores while I was away visiting my mother in the hospital, something she never actually did. Jeff had left the money management to Rachel and was surprised to discover that she had far less saved than he believed. When Jeff confronted her, Rachel admitted that she had made poor investment choices, leading to significant financial losses. Jeff sincerely apologized to both John and me. Mariana, I'm truly sorry for my wife's behavior. Rachel made a serious mistake and will handle the payments for the mansion. Please forget about it. I'll also make sure she repays the money you both gave her, even if it takes some time, Jeff said. Turning to Rachel, Rachel, you need to apologize too. I'm sorry, Rachel mumbled, her voice small, lacking the forcefulness she'd shown before. It's all right if you're sincere, I replied, watching my mother-in-law shrink before my eyes. Despite the difficult situation, I felt a sense of relief. In the end, Rachel didn't have the money for the mansion's down payment. When she tried to secure a new loan, it was denied. Since Rachel had already given notice to move out of their current house and had nowhere to go, she and Jeff decided to downsize to a smaller apartment with lower rent. Rachel, who had never worked before, started working part-time to repay us. To lift our spirits, I took my family to Aunt Michelle's restaurant for dinner. Aunt Michelle excitedly told us that she had found a piece of land just around the corner and decided to build a new restaurant there instead of renovating the old one. I want my regulars to keep enjoying my food every day, she said with a smile, offering us a taste of the new dishes she plans to serve after the relocation. After the move, Aunt Michelle will live in the house where my mother used to live. The new restaurant will be completed in a year and we're all looking forward to it. Thank you so much. If anything ever happens to you, I'll be there for you. You can count on me, Aunt Michelle said seriously, her warmth evident. Her cooking has always been delicious, the same comforting taste I've known since childhood. Katie and Patrick love it too, and they were thrilled. As we enjoyed Aunt Michelle's food together as a family, I couldn't help but feel that my mother was smiling down on us from heaven.